Well, welcome, folks. I'm going to ask that you go ahead and mute yourselves for the time being. We'll go over a couple of housekeeping notes. A few more people might join us, but we do want to get started on time for those of you who are able to make it on time. My name is Jen, and I'm happy to be here on behalf of ComPsych. And today we're going to talk about coping with compassion stress. I will be on camera just for this part, and then I'll go off camera for the presentation, only because I have multiple screens and I'm drinking water, and we've learned that it gets very distracting for folks to watch me do that. You are welcome to keep your cameras off. With such a small group, I would like to encourage everyone to go ahead and be brave and participate today. You can do so either in the chat, or you can unmute yourself if you have something to say and just add to the experience overall. I'll leave it up to you which one you prefer. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to give you some contact information. It's probably going to be very important. It's important at every session, but this one in particular. Today, we're going to touch on a lot of things, but we're not going to get in depth really with any of them. But compassion stress, compassion fatigue, they can lead to burnout. And we know that burnout is a complicated issue. So I want to encourage you all, take what you learned today and consider reaching out to us for free, confidential, one-on-one support for whatever it is that you're facing. I'm going to go ahead and stop my camera, but get moving forward on the presentation. So my first question for you all, and again, you can answer it in the chat or feel free to speak out if you would like. I just want to know, why did you choose to sign on today? What about this appealed to you?
I am compassion fatigued.
Yeah.
So it's a lot. Life is a lot, you know. So any resources or advice to, I don't know, kind of stay on top of it all is welcome.
Absolutely.
In my life.
Yeah, thank you for that. Anyone else care to share, either out loud or in the chat? Yeah, some dittos in there. I've been in several situations lately that have needed compassion. Okay. Well, I think we're going to be able to address, everyone's concerns today, because we know that there's something powerful in the moments where we connect with others on that deeper, more intimate level. Whether it's helping a friend through a divorce, supporting a coworker whose parent might be in need of care. But what we also know is that in these connecting moments, we need to be mindful of protecting ourselves. And all too often we set that aside. We forget to do that. We have to make sure that we aren't taking on too much. For those of you who are natural empaths, this is going to be especially true, because hearing and supporting someone who's going through a difficult time can really wear us down. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about when other people's emotions and situations are wearing us down. You might have also heard a term like vicarious trauma, whereby we're traumatized by the events that are happening in other people's lives. These are all related. And while they might, according to the dictionary, have a few slight differences, overall, they're pretty much the same thing. We're being negatively impacted by the experiences of other people who we're trying to help. So today on our agenda, we're going to talk about what is compassion stress and what are some of the risk factors that we can look at for developing it. We're going to take a look at the stages of compassion fatigue. A lot of times, once we start going through those stages, you're going to notice that this is a cycle in your professional life and or your personal life. And that's okay, because now that you can name it, you can start to interrupt it. And that's where we're going to get into talking about the interventions and preventions overall. How it is that we find balance in our work and our life. Which common emotional obstacles we're likely to face in dealing with compassion stress, compassion fatigue, and in trying to set new boundaries for ourselves. And then, of course, some self-care strategies. So let's start right at the beginning, because that's a great place to start with anything. Just taking a look at what is compassion stress. All right, this is stress that can occur in any profession where you regularly interact with the public. It's commonly found among healthcare, mental health care providers, educators, nonprofit and community-based workers, the police, and firefighters. But it can be found anywhere where we're regularly dealing with the public, right? It can also occur in your personal life when someone who's close to you is going through something traumatic. It's important to note that this compassion stress, it's progressive. It doesn't just happen in one instance. Slowly, we start to have subtle changes in our mood, It becomes more and more difficult for us to regain our energy or to maintain our positive outlook when it comes to work. Or when we do take time off, we don't feel re-energized after it. When we're not in compassion stress, we still need time away from our work. But toward the end of vacation, we're looking forward to going back. If you're dealing with a lot of compassion stress, even though you've had some time away, you might be dreading going back to work. We stopped looking forward to it in general, or we're really only able to see the unpleasant aspects of our job. It's difficult for us to identify with the positive pieces anymore. Of course, we know this can lead to burnout. Burnout is problematic because there is no coming back, right? Without some sort of professional or medical intervention. People who are truly burned out, it's as if you've burnt a candle completely out. There's no coming back to it. You'd have to rebuild a whole new candle. So the best thing that we can do is as the candle starts to get a little bit low, is we add some wax back, we add to the wick, and we keep it going. But if we allow it to completely burn out, there's no coming back without significant intervention. Some of the things that we can look out for are our job performance. We start to struggle with our job, that might be a sign that we are struggling with compassion fatigue or compassion stress. If we start to keep the people that we care about, like our patients or our clients or our students, at an arm's length, start to get really impersonal with them, we lose our motivation. We start to experience healthcare problems, things like high blood pressure, insomnia, or hypersomnia, where you're sleeping much more than you typically would, depression, and or addiction. It's important to note then that while compassion stress typically happens at work, it impacts every area of our lives. And that's why it's so important that we understand the cycle of it and how we can interrupt it. I've got an assessment here. It's got 8 questions. I'm not going to ask you, if we were in a more confidential setting, I would ask you to share your score, but I'm not going to ask you to do that. But I want you to look through this. And just keep track of, from 0 to 8, how many of these things are true for you? Do you feel run down and drained of physical or emotional energy? No matter how much sleep you receive or how much time you take off of work, you just are regularly feeling dragged down. Number 2, do you find that you're prone to negative thinking about your job? Are you depressed on Fridays because you know that Monday's coming again? Do you find that you're harder and less sympathetic with the people who really deserve that sympathy? You feel annoyed when people share their frustrations with you. You start to minimize the feelings of others. Number 4, do you find yourself getting easily irritated by small problems or by your clients or coworkers? Number 5, do you feel misunderstood or unappreciated by your clients or your coworkers? You feel like you're doing all this work for nothing. No one acknowledges or appreciates you. Number 6, does it feel as if you have no one to talk to? You have a sense of loneliness. No one else really understands what you're going through. Number 7, do you feel that there's more work to do than you could practically get done? You feel like you're drowning and will never be able to rise to the surface. Maybe you even feel almost lackadaisical. Why even try when you know you'll never get out of this mess? And number 8, do you feel like you're in the wrong organization or the wrong profession? Rightly or wrongly, it's just not as enjoyable as you thought it would be. So the higher your score, the more likely it is that you're really struggling with compassion stress. But if you said yes to even one of these, again, I'm going to give you our information at the end. We are a completely free, confidential resource. You want to interrupt this as early on as possible. So if your score was anything 1 or above, I want to encourage you to reach out and get the one-on-one support so that you can start to come out of this. So I am going to ask you all a few questions, and again, answer to your level of comfort, since in this setting we don't have a similar level of privacy as we would in GoToWebinar, for example. In what ways do your interactions with others cause you stress? And how does that stress show itself, or what happens when you get stressed? We're going to start with those first two. We'll do the third one later. But in what ways do your interactions with others cause you stress, and how does that stress show up for you?
I feel stressed out because I guess my natural reaction when I listen to people's problems is to try to figure out a solution for it. And there's just not enough solutions in the world. And I don't know how to deal with my emotional response to people's traumatic issues without feeling like I have to solve them. And so I just end up sitting with that and not being able to do anything with it, and just builds up.
Yeah, that's tough. Thank you for sharing that.
No problem.
Anyone else? I take on others' problems like my own, and that it's my responsibility to help them. Yeah. We hear this a lot from people who experience high levels of compassion stress, what Sherry was just saying, what's going on in the chat. This idea that we have a responsibility to try to make things better. That's very indicative of someone who's likely to succumb to compassion stress. We are not the cause of any of these problems, and we have zero power in solving them, and yet we take on the responsibility of it. We want so desperately to help. And then, as was mentioned in this, stress can be everything from physical symptoms like a headache or tension to emotional. It's harder to regulate our emotions. Yes. So we like to break down the impacts of stress into 4 areas. 2 of them are touched on there. You have your physical symptoms and you have your emotional symptoms. We also talk about the cognitive symptoms of stress. So the ways in which stress impact how you think and your ability to focus, for example. And then you have your behavioral reactions. Yes, brain fog, exactly. You have your behavioral reactions where you get really snippy with people, you get short with them, you start calling into work sick or whatnot. Those are all reactions to stress that are understandable. And so a couple of you have mentioned, and others of you have said, yes, I agree with that. What have you tried to make things better? What have you tried to do, and has it worked? What are some things that you tried to work on this, and yes, that made it a little better, or no, it didn't help at all?
I think the only thing I've ever tried is really avoidance. Just trying not to get myself in the situation, but no, it doesn't work. It just ends up making me feel isolated, which is like the opposite end of the spectrum.
Right.
So.
Yeah, because anyone who gets this, you're naturally seeking connection, right? And so when you avoid, now you're cutting yourself off from so much.
Yeah. I had a stroke in 2005, and it was the result of compassion stress. And what ended up happening is I had to actually leave the stressful job for 3 years in order to work on myself to get over that. I administered something called family and medical leave for a large university. And over the years, it built up. I had, dealing with a lot of very sick employees and family members. People died, on a regular basis. They came to me at the point when they were terminal. And that literally I learned, you can't fix a terminal illness.
Right.
But I tried to anyway, and I did that for many years. And the headache was the first warning that I didn't recognize. I had an extremely bad headache for about 10 days. And one day I went into work and was actually in my office when I had my stroke. And after seeing the doctor, they determined that it was a buildup. They didn't call it compassion stress at the time. They actually called it mother confessor syndrome. I specifically remember the doctor using. And the only solution was to remove myself from that position. And it took 3 years, but that was the only solution, was to remove myself from the situation.
Yeah, I mean, and that is obviously, one of the extreme examples of what can happen. And I'm so happy that you're here with us today and able to tell us your story. And it's an important part of why we do these webinars and why we talk about these things, because the risks are real. The risks aren't just that you're going to have a bad day, right? Or that you're going to be a little bit grumpy. This long-term chronic stress, whether it's compassion stress or whether it's financial stress, we know a lot of folks are experiencing a lot of social stress around race and violence. All of that stress has a real impact on our health overall. And so we've got to try to figure out how to mitigate it. We have to, for our own well-being and for the well-being of each other. So thank you so much for sharing that.
My main point that I really wanted to make in sharing that is that don't ignore the symptoms.
Yes.
Do something. If I would have gone to the doctor when the headaches first started, I probably could have avoided the stroke, but I kept just telling myself, oh, you're working too many hours. Oh, you're stressed out. It'll get better.
Mm-hmm.
And I ignored it instead of trying to get some help.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And that's why I said, even if you only said yes to one of those questions, reach out now. Get the assistance that you need. You don't have to wait until you're burned out. You certainly, we don't want anyone waiting until they're at the point of causing extreme physical harm to their bodies before we recognize there's some help to be had here. Thank you so much for reiterating that. So we've all tried usually a number of things to try to make it better. We talked about avoidance, either of the work or just trying to ignore the impact that stress is having on us emotionally or physically. Many of us at a certain point in our career have changed careers in an attempt to try to get away from it. And then we recognize that it just keeps showing up. And so next I'm going to talk about what are some of the risk factors. These are some things. Oh, I do see in the chat. Thank you. Counseling, deep breaths, letting things go, taking time outside, hiking. Those are all wonderful ways to start to alleviate some of that stress. There's some risk factors that we have so that we can look at this and say, all right, it's not necessarily that I have to leave my job, although in extreme cases, of course, it can be that. But it might be something that has to do with me. If you find yourself getting burned out or a lot of compassion stress, no matter what job you're in, there might be some things about you that are putting you at risk. And this isn't to assign blame, but it's so that you can start to see what are some changes I want to make. All right. So one of the number one indicators to us that someone's at risk for compassion stress is the inability to say no to demands on their time and energy. When we're young children, most of us learn the strong impact of the word no. It's a huge developmental milestone. But we lose our ability. Sometimes just even as young children, that word loses its power, or we're taught that it's bad. And so part of what we need to do is we need to reclaim the word no and reclaim that message. A no doesn't have to be rude. It doesn't have to be off-putting, but it can be about setting our own boundaries. Another thing that puts folks at risk is to assume added responsibilities when they're already working at capacity. Many people who end up with compassion stress are some of our quote unquote best employees. They're the ones who we can go to with anything and we know that they're going to do a good job. So part of what happens then if we are those quote unquote good employees, those best employees, is that in not saying no and taking everything on, we put ourselves again at higher risk. If you have an employee, if you are a manager, or if you have a colleague who you know just says yes to everything and takes everything on, please send this recording to them. Let them know, like, hey, I'm just looking out for you, right? Other folks who consistently sacrifice their personal lives for work. There's not a magic number that I know of that is you should spend this much of your time at work and this much on your personal life. That looks different for each of us. But for the most part, and much of the time, we shouldn't feel like we're sacrificing our personal lives on behalf of our work. Now, there might be temporary periods. I live on a college campus with someone who runs college housing. Guess what? It's August, it's move-in. I don't see that person. This is a time where things are really busy and things in our personal life need to get set aside. But that shouldn't be the norm for people who are seeking balance. If you are consistently having to sacrifice your personal life for work, you might be at higher risk. Lacking control in their positions. Folks who have a lot of responsibility, but relatively little power. You want to keep an eye out for your frontline staff. You want to keep an eye out for your middle managers. They have a lot of responsibility, but typically very little power. Folks who tend to be more quiet about their problems, their feelings. We're not going out, we're not talking to others, we're not engaging in our own health and wellness. We're putting ourselves at higher risk of compassion stress. Right? If we're the type of person who routinely criticizes ourselves or feels guilty, especially if we can say to ourselves, there's no reason for me to feel guilty about this. I think, Sherry kind of touched on this a little. And someone else commented, I know I can't fix the problem. I know I'm not responsible for the problem, but I still feel bad that I can't make it better. Right? Those of us who haven't learned how to manage our stress effectively in general. And this last one, those of us who view work as a calling, we expect our work to give our life meaning. We're putting ourselves at higher risk of compassion stress. That doesn't mean that you can't find meaning in your work. That doesn't mean that your work can't be your calling, but just know that that puts you at higher risk. And so you're going to want to combat compassion stress in some very intentional ways. All right, so great question. How does one say no when you were never asked if it was okay in the first place? Obviously, most of us need our jobs, so it can be difficult to do. But if someone places a task on you, going back with a simple, okay, I see that you want me to get this done. What would you like for me to stop working on in order to make time for that? Which of these other things should I take off of my plate? Right? Or which of these things do you want me to move further down on the list of priorities so that I can address that new thing? Try not to say it with as much snark as I just did, but that's the message, right? They gave it to you, okay? So how am I? Help me help you. That's the message there. It's a great question. Sometimes we do have to say no after the fact. Any other questions about this risk of, or if I missed anything in the chat? I'm trying to keep an eye on it, but it's on a different screen. So. All right, folks. We also often have some faulty perceptions about the world, about our own abilities. Some of you already mentioned this. Some faulty perceptions that keep us in compassion stress. I will fix the problem. Statements like, I need to educate all of my students. I need to solve all of my clients' mental health concerns. I need to cure my patient of their terminal disease. That's all beyond our scope. It puts us at risk of compassion stress, and it puts us in a position to fail and to fail regularly. We can't fix everything. And also, when we try to do this, we disempower the people that we work with. Even kindergartners or preschoolers, they have a certain level of autonomy. And so if you work in education, you do what you can, you give them the resources that are available, but the 4-year-old gets to decide whether or not to color. Right? And that continues all the way through adult education, college, grad school, doctorate programs, everything in between. You do your best to set up an environment in which it's safe for them to learn, in which it's possible for them to learn. And then sometimes we need to let go of trying to fix it. All right. We've got to let go of the idea that we are responsible for the outcomes of other people's lives. And then sometimes this gets us. We have to let go of the idea that people are going to appreciate what we do for them, because that will drag you down very quickly. It's not always true that people are even going to notice what you do for them. Oftentimes you'll hear gratitude, but much of the time you're not going to. And if you're waiting for that gratitude to feel as if you're doing a good job or that you're doing work worth doing, again, you're setting yourself up for failure. You've got to look for some of those internalized ways to accept that we're doing a good job. It would be great if our supervisors, if our students, if our clients, if they all told us how wonderful we are all the time. but it's just pretty rare. Don't try to.
I hadn't.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say I hadn't thought about compassion fatigue as some kind of like symptom of needing external validation until you just said that right now.
Yeah. Right, because it's exhausting, especially if you're waiting for someone to acknowledge what you're doing, and especially if one small acknowledgement would just make your whole day, which usually it will. It would be great if we could just get that one small acknowledgement every day. Sometimes we don't get that, and we've got to realize it's not coming, and so we've got to give it to ourselves. Yeah. All right.
This is my turn into a personal therapy session.
Yeah, I mean, I do like Zoom for that. I can get a lot more out of it for sure. All right, so the belief that you know what you're getting yourself into, we've got to leave some room for the unknown. The idea that you can do it all alone. You might be, again, many of you on the call are likely identified as some of the best employees. That's why you're here, because you do get fatigued, because you are constantly doing for others. And you might lean into that reputation even. You might like that you're seen as independent, as someone who can accomplish things. But part of what we have to do is we have to start leaning into others. Right? Or this idea that if we're just strong enough, we can deal with the stress. To the one person's comment, it's just a headache. I'll push through it, right? I can deal with this. I can still work. And obviously that ended in a very, tragic situation. And so we just want to be, we want to be careful about that, about believing that we can do everything or that it depends on our strength. And then especially if this is happening at work, this belief that our family or friends will understand and accept our absence from the relationship. They might deal with it, but is that really something that we want to be regularly putting on the people that we care about? So these are all things that go into having compassion fatigue or compassion stress. And so for the next part, I'm going to go over what are the stages. And like I said, in these next few slides, a lot of us can start to see where we are. So we're going to talk about the passionate phase, the overwhelmed phase, the irritability phase, the withdrawal phase, and then illness as one outcome, or renewal and maturation as the other. All right, your passionate phase, this is where you're really highly motivated. There's this feeling that you're doing the work that you were meant to do, you're committed, you're going the extra mile, you're solving problems that aren't even yours. You feel like you're really making a difference in the world. As an employer or as a supervisor, this is the person that you're looking for, right? But this is really rooted in a certain level of naiveness. This stage cannot last for long, perhaps 1 or 2 years at most. And depending on the type of work that we're doing and all those risk factors that we have, the amount of support that we're getting from our employers, from our teams, sometimes it doesn't even last for that first year. It's a fun phase to be in, but we can't stay in it forever. There's no balance in the passionate phase, but it doesn't feel bad because you love what you're doing so much. But eventually the passionate phase, if we stay in it without finding any sense of balance, leads us to the overwhelmed phase. You're in the overwhelmed phase if you're just kind of regularly having intrusive thoughts about your clients or your students' problems or pain. Or if you have this compulsive desire to help certain people. You just feel like you can't help but try to be there for them. You're attracted to a certain type of person that you want to be there for. Maybe you have a soft spot for single parents. Maybe you have a soft spot for immigrants, whatever it might be, but you just find yourself needing to help a certain group of people even more. Your clients and your work issues start to encroach on your personal time during this overwhelmed phase. You start to find that you want to let go of some of your work-related matters, but you just can't figure out how. When we start to view our clients or our students or whomever as fragile, we start to think that they need us, that we're not just adding to their life, but that somehow we are core to it. Start to feel overwhelmed, and then we move into being irritated. We know that we're in the irritated stage when we start to cut corners. We become more dismissive. We just want to get things done. We're not following policies. We're just trying to do what's convenient. Now, some of those favorite people or some of the favorite types of people that you used to work with, you start to dread working with them because you know how draining that it becomes. You haven't done a great job of setting boundaries to this point. And so now the people who once drove you and made you feel passionate are the ones who you don't look forward to whatsoever. You might start to engage in denigrating some of the people that you serve, or your sense of humor becomes inappropriate. That can be a sign that you're in this irritable phase. Now, don't get me wrong, my 3 best friends are all social workers. I'm a therapist who works with foster youth primarily. We've got a weird sense of humor, and it helps us get through some of the very hard work that we do. But we know when to turn it on and when to turn it off. And that's what's important. I'm not saying that you can't have a little bit of a dark sense of humor, but ask yourself, when is it coming out and how is it impacting? And how much of it is really humor-based and how much of it is that you really are starting to believe some of these things that you used to think were a little bit funny. Often when we're in the irritable phase, we have a lot of oversights. Mistakes happen. We can't concentrate on what's happening. And we really start to distance ourselves from our friends and our coworkers. Again, that desire to isolate, push ourselves away. In all of this, the thing is we still care very much about the work that we're doing and about the people that we're working with. We just can't seem to connect. And that's where we get our sense of inadequacy. We know that the work that we're doing matters. We just can't seem to do a good job of it anymore. We also might start to perceive threats or demands. So it used to be that if someone brought us a new client, we were excited about it, or we were at least in a position where we wanted to get to know that person. And now, every time we get told that we have a new client or a new student, we start to feel as if, well, they're just overworking me. This is too demanding. They want more from me than anyone could possibly give. They want me to fail. Once we get through the irritable phase, if we haven't done anything to intervene, we end up at the withdrawal phase. This is where no matter who the client or the student or whomever is, they're just irritants. They're not people anymore. You can't keep track of who's who because all the problems just kind of blend together. You're no longer really able to see them as individuals. You're tired all the time. And the last thing that you want to do is talk about your job. At this point, we're often neglecting our family, our clients, our coworkers, and ourselves. We're just not in a position to take care of anyone. And whereas before we were worried about inappropriate humor, now we can't find humor in anything. Everything is serious. Everything hurts on an emotional level. We don't have any energy. We find ourselves withdrawing and isolating, start sleeping too much or sleeping too little, gaining or losing weight. We're tardy, we're absent. We're not even bothering coming into work because it's just too hard. So we take a lot of sick days. All of these phases, you can interrupt at any point. Right? So even back in the passionate phase, part of what we want to do to interrupt that is to, even though we really love the work that we're doing, still want to leave at a reasonable hour. Right? Even though we know how important we are to our coworkers and our colleagues, we still want to take vacation. And then throughout, you can see as we move forward in the phases, there are plenty of opportunities to try to interrupt. But if you continue on the path of compassion stress, you're going to hit kind of a fork in the road. You're either going to hit illness and victimization, or again, maturation and renewal. So illness is where you feel overwhelmed and you have to leave the profession. You can't even stay in it anymore. Or you have a somatic illness where you have a physical illness as a result of everything that's happening in your life. Or sometimes folks stay in it and they end up in addiction, addicted to alcohol, drugs, work, sex, food, spending, any number of things. Or on the other side, sometimes we get to the point and we're able to look back and recognize the pattern that we followed, how we ended up where we are, we're able to lean into our resiliency, and we're able to transform the way that we engage with our work. Oftentimes, if we wait until the very end, it's too late. So you want to lean into your resilience and your transformation, regardless of where you are. Whatever phase you identified with, that I talked about, you want to intervene right there. Yes, even if you're in that passionate phase, start to make sure that you're practicing balance. All right, so somatic are things that happen in your body. And so, as the person shared, having a stroke because you have so much compassion stress in your life, like your body is going to react to what's going on. You're going to get headaches, stomach aches. There's a lot of evidence coming out that stress is related to certain types of cancers. Your body is going to do something with all the stress that you're carrying. Thank you for asking that question. So then let's talk about some interventions. Let's talk about some ways that we intervene. We've now seen the way that we end up here, the steps that we go in. Most of us can relate to starting out at any new job. We're passionate, and then slowly or quickly kind of run downhill. So first and foremost, you've got to be able to recognize the signs. You've got to be able to say, this is what's happening for me, so that then you can make a plan. And set some boundaries. Set some expectations. If your position is one that has a well outlined description, lean into that. If it doesn't, as many of ours don't, then have a good conversation with your supervisor, with your team members, and just say, hey, I know I've been taking on a lot, and I'm happy to help the team, but I feel like maybe it's too much. Is there anything that I'm doing that's not really a part of my job that we could take off, that either doesn't have to get done by anyone or that other people can take on? And if they say no, and it's really not part of your job, sometimes what we have to do then is, again, we go back to, okay, so what can come off? What is it? I can't do this. I'm going home by 6 p.m. every day. I'm going to continue to do as much as I can, but I just need you to know, you cannot expect me to stay until 9 every night or whatever it might be. Again, practice saying no. Practice it in small ways. So if someone sends you a request for a meeting at 12, if it's not going to do damage to the relationship or damage to you, just go back with hey, can't do 12, can we meet at 12:10? It's a relatively small way to just practice saying no. Even if you could meet at 12, if you know it's not that big of a deal, just practice saying no in these really inconsequential moments to these small things so that you gain some confidence around it. And also so you can start to see that people don't mind probably as much as you assume they do. So with that in mind, what's one way you could practice saying no in the next week? What's something you think you could practice saying no to?
My neighbor asked me to cook lasagna that she bought today, and I really don't want to do it, so I might just not do it.
There you go, practice it. Okay. Sorry, I can't do that. Anyone else? Like I said, just look for opportunities, even if it's a small no. Like I said, move the meeting by 10 minutes. Don't, cook the dinner that you want instead of the dinner that someone else wants. Just these small inconsequential no's can help you build up the courage and the practice of setting boundaries for yourself. Sometimes we just have to take control. You can't control everything, but check out where you are in the process and what's going on and ask yourself, what can I control here? What can I not control? Start just focusing on those things that you have control over. Get some social professional support. Reach out to others. You all can presumably see who else is on the line. If you know anyone else on the line, talk with one another. Make some sort of commitment to support one another in this. Engage in some self-care strategies, whatever that means for you. It can be exercise, it can be eating well, it can be doing yard work, it can be going to the spa. But some of the most radical ways that we can really practice self-care, we've already talked about: saying no and setting good boundaries. And then focus on your work and life balance. So now we're going to talk about the components of a balanced life. These are all pieces of a balanced life: career, romance, family and friends, health, personal growth, recreation, sense of home, and your financial situation. Now, when I say they are components, again, that does not mean that they are the same for everyone. There are aromantic people in the world for whom romance is not important at all. And there are people for whom financial security doesn't mean a whole lot. Okay? So what we're going to look at next is, how do you begin to gauge whether or not you have a balanced life? And we're going to use the example of what we call the balanced wheel. And this is all about rating your satisfaction in any of these areas. So this presentation will be emailed out to you, just like hopefully we did last time. Not just the recording, but also the presentation will be sent to you, because these can serve as handouts. You can literally print them off. And the idea is not to create a balance in the sense that you spend the same number of hours on everything each week, but rather that you have a sense of satisfaction that is similar in each of these areas. So some of us, our wheel looks a little bit like this. We're satisfied with our physical environment and our career and our financial situation, but we're not satisfied at all with our health, our relationship with our friends and family, and personal growth. So the idea in trying to overcome compassion stress is to figure out which of these areas do you want to add to. And sometimes, yes, that means stepping back. If your career is at a 9, but it becomes completely at the cost of you having any room to do any personal growth, sometimes we have to say, okay, I'm going to take my career down to an 8 so that I have a little bit of time to put somewhere else. This exercise is just meant to attune us to the various aspects of our lives, some that we might have overlooked completely. So if we were in person, of course, I would have this for you. But again, I'm going to encourage you, we're going to send out the PowerPoint so that you can print this off, or you can do it electronically. But the idea is, try to create a balanced wheel for yourself.
What would you say, or like what kinds of things would fall under the personal growth?
So personal growth, yeah, it can be spirituality. For some people,
okay.
it's religion and spirituality. For some people, it's kind of related to health in terms of exercise or managing your own mental health, things like that. Just anything that you're doing mostly for yourself. Yeah, some way of leading to your own satisfaction. Good question. So I encourage you all to think about making your wheel and then coming up with a plan for how you can make your wheel a little bit more balanced. It's going to help prevent that compassion stress, because you're going to have all areas of your life that you're addressing. And then we have some emotional obstacles. Again, many of you touched on this already. We have emotional absorption. When someone tells us something painful, we can't help but feel their pain. This is real. Studies have shown when they'll do brain scans, and they can see that when we listen to other people's pain, our pain receptors light up. Right? Same thing when we listen to other people's joy, our joy receptors light up. We are meant to be connected. We are social. Socially connected creatures. And so part of what we have to do is we have to just acknowledge, what it is that's going on for us. And begin to ask ourselves, what do I need to do, not to become completely removed from the pain of others, but to protect myself some from it? Are there mantras I can tell myself? Are there practices I can do so that I'm not overwhelming my pain receptors? Maybe I need to put some space in my schedule so that I'm not hearing one bad thing after another. Whatever it might be, start to ask yourself, how can I separate myself a little bit from the pain of other people? Not to the point of becoming detached, because that removes everything that we've talked about, but to the point of protecting ourselves. Side note, I don't know who on here are cat people versus dog people, But dogs have a lot of these same neurons that mirror back our emotions. Cats, not so much. So if you think, if you want, try to be a little bit more like a cat. You don't want to be to the point where you don't interact with anyone. Don't be that lone cat that's out there by itself. But the cat who's able to take care of itself and sometimes come in for some cuddles, but isn't completely overwhelmed. Whereas your dog, if your dog's anything like mine, my dog is obsessed with me. Try not to be so much like the dog. Try not to be obsessed with everyone in your life. All right. All right. Your boundaries can be an emotional obstacle. Just ask yourself, should I even be doing this? Sometimes we have so much empathy for those that we serve, we start to cross boundaries. Right? It's okay to say, that's not my job. Now, you don't want to use those words with your students or your clients or whomever. You don't ever want to tell them, hey, that's not my job. But what you can start to do to set that boundary is, so-and-so in this office is probably better able to help you with that. Let me put you in touch with this person who's going to be able to give you all the information you need about that. It's okay to step back and to not do everyone's jobs for them. And start just by asking yourself, is this something I should be doing? And if it's not, it's okay to pass that off to another person. All right. Enabling. Let me just do that for you. When we enable, we overstep the boundaries. We start taking over. We stop treating people as if they are able to manage their own lives. And this is problematic for them as well as us. We want people to be empowered by their interactions with us, not feel as if they don't have any power. One of the ways that we often think about enabling is when it comes to things like substance abuse. So the spouse who drinks, when asked why, they describe all their stressors, but the wife covers for them, or the husband, whomever, tries to take away those stressors in order to get the spouse to stop drinking. But taking away the stressors, that's not why the person drinks, right? Trying to just fix everything for your client or your student, that's not why things are going bad in their life. It's not just all of these problems that exist. It's that they don't have the ability to take care of it themselves. And so part of what we want to do is we want to give them that ability. We want to empower them to take care of it for themselves. So they don't just keep having to lean onto the next person and the next person. With the alcoholic or the addict, sometimes we have to let them experience the real problems that their drinking or their drug use is causing. We've got to do that just to help them see that they want to make a change, right? And then finally, setting limits and saying no. We've already talked about how hard that is. We worry that people aren't going to like us. But again, keep in mind that saying no helps you build relationships based on mutual respect. It evens the playing field, so to speak. It shows that you respect yourself, you respect your time, and it allows other people to respect you as well. Oftentimes we're afraid of saying no, or we're uncomfortable with it. But again, creating those boundaries is one of the most important ways that we can deal with compassion stress. So when we think about saying yes or saying no, often we're thinking about the one discrete decision. But on this next slide, we're going to consider something a little bit different. And that is that by saying yes to one thing, we are automatically saying no to another, and vice versa. Let's go to the question that was asked in the chat earlier. What about when I'm just given something? Something is handed to me. I don't feel like I'm given the opportunity to say no. And I gave you all an example of how you might say no to that. When you say no to just accepting whatever work is handed to you, what are you saying yes to?
Overextending yourself or being taken advantage of.
You're saying yes to that. Absolutely. What else are you
And you're-
saying yes to? Oh, go ahead.
You're saying yes for them to do it again. Saying yes, it's okay for you to continue to give me more and more stuff to do.
Mm. By saying yes to doing the work that's just handed to you, you might be saying no to doing a good job. By saying yes to just doing the work, maybe you're saying no to having family time. And that's not how that's not what you're thinking in the moment, but that's the reality. We only have so much time in our day. We only have so much capacity to get work done. Similarly, when you say no, you're saying yes to certain things. So when you say, hey, I'm happy to do this, but what are we taking off of my plate, or what are we reprioritizing? You're saying no to just taking on that work. You're saying yes to having free time. You're saying yes to being able to do a really good job at the work that you already have or at the work that you're going to complete. Sometimes you just ask yourself that when you're afraid to say no to someone, someone, maybe a student or a client calls you up and they say, hey, can you meet on Friday? And you know that you already were planning to leave a little bit early. You've already worked a zillion hours this week or whatever it might be. You're really tempted to say yes to that client, but remind yourself, when you say yes to them, you're saying no to a lot of other things. Sometimes it helps just to think about that. Because remember, what we're aiming for is a balanced wheel. Now, it's not going to be perfect, of course, but this is what we're looking for. We're looking to be satisfied in each of these areas. Not to be equally miserable, let me be clear. We don't want to just be failing at everything. But sometimes we have to step back a little in one area in order to really step up in another. And although it might not be perfect, the more balanced your wheel is, as they say, the smoother the ride will be. One last slide, and then I'll give you our information. Just some self-care strategies. Make sure that you're getting enough rest. Most people need between 7 and 8 hours of sleep per night. But also rest throughout the day. Go on your lunch break. Rest throughout the year. Take your vacation time. Research holds up. The more stress you have, the more rest you need. Exercise, exercise, exercise. Exercise releases all sorts of positive things into your body. It also helps to eliminate and metabolize all of your stress hormones. So if you face a bear in the woods, your body has a stress reaction. It releases cortisol, it gets your heart rate pumping, it increases your blood pressure. All good things in case you have to run away from or fight a bear. The problem is, if instead of facing a bear, what you're dealing with is the stress of all of this compassion fatigue that you're experiencing, your body has the exact same reaction. It releases cortisol, your heart rate gets going, your blood pressure increases. We need to burn that off. That's what that response is there for. It's a physiological response, whether it's an emotional stressor or whether it's a physical stressor. So exercise can help you deal with that. Regular cardiovascular exercise, really huffing and puffing for 20 minutes or 3 to 4 times a week, actually helps boost your mood and create new brain cells. There's a common myth out there that we don't create new brain cells. That's simply not true. And in fact, stress is one of the ways that we lose our brain cells. So we want to exercise, we want to burn off all of those cell-killing chemicals and really bring about some positivity. If you're not already exercising, just add something small. Does anyone want to take a guess? What is the best exercise that you can add to your routine? What do folks think? A walk?
Walking.
Yeah. Walking. Anyone else want to venture a guess? Walking tends to be the most common thing that I see. Some folks say stretching or yoga or weightlifting. Here's the thing. This is I'm not a personal trainer, but I've never had a personal trainer argue with me on this. The number one exercise that you can add to your routine is one that you enjoy doing. That's it. Because then you're going to actually do it. And that's what's important. Doing it is far more important than what you do. Now, if you're training for a marathon, go on some runs. But if you're just exercising for health and wellness, just choose something that you enjoy doing. It is a trick question, yeah. Make time for recreation, find a hobby, something that you just enjoy doing for the sake of doing it. Maybe you'll make money off of it, but that's not why you're doing it. Maybe it's good for your family, but that's not why you're doing it. You're doing it simply because you enjoy it. Spend time building relationships with the people who matter to you. Research suggests you need about 5 hours a week with your significant other of just time talking with each other. And when it comes to our friends and our other family members, we really want to focus on having some good quality time with them, but also quantity of time. It's harder in times of COVID, but spend time with the people you care about. And finally, re-engage with your community. You are helping people in your work. That's great. But if you're doing the exact same thing all day at work, you can get burned out, as we've talked about. So sometimes by connecting with our community, we feel like we're part of something larger than ourselves, and we really get fed from that larger thing. Start to feel more a part of something. It's a little bit easier to set some boundaries and recognize that we're good people doing good work, and that we're important not just at work and not just to our clients or whoever it is that's experiencing stress, but we're important elsewhere. So again, folks, if you are experiencing compassion stress, compassion fatigue, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are completely free, confidential resource available to you anytime, day or night. You can check out our website at guidanceresources.com. When you go there, you'll need to register for a username and password. And as part of that, it will ask for your company's web ID, which for you all is just CNMCC. Or give us a call, still 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every single day of the year at 844-236-4493. We're here to chat with you in the moment or to help you get connected with someone locally who can help you more in a one-on-one type of way. So if you're experiencing compassion stress, or really if anything else in life has you stressed or distressed, don't be afraid to reach out. We're here to help with anything. All right, folks, does anyone have any questions about compassion stress or about the services that we offer overall? Let me turn my camera back on for this part. If you don't have any questions, you're welcome to just sign off, or you can listen for other people. It's up to you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
I have a question. So I just transitioned out of teaching, and I feel like a lot of what you covered was like super relevant. And I'm like, I'm no longer in that role, but sometimes I feel that way. Mm-hmm. And so like, for me, learning about the things that I can do, like that was really eye-opening, because I never thought that I had control about, like, you know, and I thought I was a teacher who wasn't stepping, you know, into those boundaries or over those boundaries with students and their families. But still, I felt a lot of that weight like on my end of the, and I'm just wondering, like, is there a way that we can move beyond that? Like, what can I do to kind of get into the regeneration stage? Because I feel like sometimes I still feel that even though I'm not in that space anymore.
Yeah, and so there are a couple of things you can do. One, of course, is think about that wheel of balance. And when you find yourself putting a lot of mental energy into, you know, the students or their families or whatnot, ask yourself, can I shift my way of thinking right now? Is there something else that I'd rather be putting this energy into? So you can try to intervene really directly when you notice it. Or you can go back to, let me just go back a few slides. This is where the animations stink. Sorry. You can go back to anything on this list and really think about how it is that you could be supported in this. So maybe getting some social professional support, talking with other people who are in a similar situation and finding out what they're doing. Because you all are a community college? Do I read that correctly? Is that...
Yeah, so my role is actually different now. I'm no longer, yeah. I was a high school teacher and I'm no longer in that role.
Right. So as an educator, so you're still an educator. You're maybe not in the classroom anymore, but you're definitely still an educator. Everyone who works on a college campus is, in my opinion. And so, you know, seek support from other folks who are in similar situations. It's likely that there are other new professionals on campus who might be experiencing some of the same situations as they've transitioned into something new. A lot of times when we see people transition so my first degree is in education administration before I was a therapist, so I'm speaking from this perspective. What we see is that folks move from one educational system into another, or from one part of it to another, because they're reaching the point of burnout. And of course, as we mentioned, we've got to intervene in some of these other ways. So here are some, you know, some of the stuff that we talked about are ways that you can do that. Just start to set those boundaries early on, not just with other people, but sometimes it's about setting that boundary with yourself. Like I said, I'm thinking about this. I don't want to be thinking about this anymore. This isn't, I'm going to distract myself. I'm going to take on something a little bit healthier, or really working again on that balance, or just noticing those signs if they're coming up for you. Like, okay, I wasn't ever really the type of teacher who pushed too much on the families. I leaned into the school social worker or whatnot, but I'm going to make sure that I am doubling down on that. Someone comes to me with something that really falls outside of my scope, I'm going to double down and make sure that rather than trying to address it, I really am going to try to get them to the right person, right? So just reinforcing those boundaries. And then again, reach out to us, because we're here to help, and you can talk about the specifics of your situation, and we can definitely assist you on a one-on-one basis.
Thanks so much. This was a really useful session for me. So I really appreciate all the info that you provided. I think I took a screenshot of like every slide.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? All right. I think I'll go ahead and sign off then. Again, thank you all so much. Hopefully I see you again soon.